Hey everybody, this is Cass Midgley. I'm the co-host of Everyone's Agnostic podcast. This is the weekend of September 7th, 2014. Bob and I had been planning to take this week off for some time. A couple of weeks ago when we took off, that was unplanned. But I also hate to not put something out. So I thought I'd just make a episode where I'm just going to talk. So if that doesn't entice you, then feel free. I don't know. I've got a lot of I think that's the problem. I've got way too much on my mind. It swirls around my head like a dust ball. And often I just have to come back to what it means to be human, what it means to have a conscience and to be observing and feeling and tasting and hearing the world and trying to make sense of it and meaning, purpose. That's what we do as humans. And I think that's probably the point that I want to make is, it's one of the thousands of points I want to make, but as people of meaning-making, storytelling, pattern-seeking, I think as a humanist, it would be hypocritical to deny that that is what it means to be human. And so to be anti-theist and simultaneously give space for humans to give meaning, make meaning, create narratives that make sense of their lives, no one is not only ever going to stop that, but I think anybody rational doesn't want to stop that. In fact, I think that's why, as an atheist, and I got a master's in theology, is I'm still infatuated with this stuff. 10 years ago, when I embarked on my departure from theism, there was probably a notion in my head that, okay, there is no God. And of course, when anybody ever says that, they're talking about a certain God in their imagination. When they say there is no God, they're probably thinking of an anthropomorphized, human-like projection, creation of human imagination and fantasy and superstition and fear and self-disgust. You know, you've heard anti-theists say that everybody's atheist when it comes to, say, Zeus. A full-out atheist is just one who has removed all gods from their belief structure. That is not to say that they are not people who leave room for there to be some kind of prime mover, but it goes all the way back to Socrates and Hegel, even the Neoplatonists or the young Hegelians. If you've ever heard the podcast that the ex-philosophy professors from Austin do, it's called The Partially Examined Life. And I've been listening to them for years. They're fantastic. If you're even slightly into philosophy, then check that out. But they did a program this week on Maimonides, the Guide for the Perplexed. But I think the highest road that somebody can take when it comes to pondering God and imagining God is that if it can be named, then it's not God. And this is kind of what Wayne talked about last week in episode 10. If you meet the Buddha, kill the Buddha. It does get into a mental quagmire of trying to state what God is not, primarily via negativa. And in a way, it's mental gymnastics, and I won't go into that. But I guess ultimately, as an anti-theist, what we're working towards is helping the human race be human with their imaginations, their meaning-making needs, and not be destructive towards human thriving, happiness, freedom, mutual respect, political contracts, rights, freedoms. I've already said freedoms. So I came across something, I don't remember where I found it, on the web somewhere, It was called 40 Harmful Effects of Christianity. And I thought maybe I'd just go with that. I don't know if I'll get through all 40. I want to talk about it in a couple of ways. One, when I list these, I think the thing that comes to mind is very few Christians actually believe or practice, certainly not all 40 of these, maybe even a fraction of these. But my point there would be, how can we as a people, and I think the clutch phrase for me when I was coming out of Christianity was I really felt like there was a call that I was answering to join the human race. For some reason, I love that phrase. And so I think that there's this thing going on that we call life. And it's orbital, it's circular, it's a 24-hour period, sleep, eat, work, all the things that we do in this orbit. So this is this thing that's just going on. And I've thought of it metaphorically as we're on a track from point A to point B. Maybe that's our lifetime. Point A is our birth, B is our death. But collectively, we're on this path. We're in this orbit, and we're doing this thing. And there's something about religion that is a detour, as opposed to this straight line of point A to point B, being in the thick of practicing humanity, that there's this detour that goes off, that derails, and goes way out of its way in somehow an attempt to accomplish that which could be accomplished without it. And this is ethics, this is joy, this is peace, tranquility, even transcendence. And I think Sam Harris's new book, Waking Up, is going to address that. There's so much good within religions that keep people thinking, oh, it's religion that gave me this. Sharing with somebody this weekend who had a friend who was a radical Mormon. In the midst of this conversation, he admitted, I don't know how much I really believe this stuff, but it just works. It works for his family. It works for his kids. It creates a life. And my question to him would be, is it possible to glean, like what we called last week with Wayne's podcast, cafeteriaism? Is there a way to glean truth? Where truth shows up, grab it. You're the steward of your faith journey. You're the steward of your happiness. Where truth shows up, grab it. I think that we mistake common wisdom as being something unique to that religion, which gives credence to that religion and gives validity to that religion and anchors one to that religion. An example, last night, Mindy and I went to see an art display of an art teacher. Two of our kids had him in class, and my kids are artistic. All four of them are great drawers, musicians, poets, writers. They have great creative brains. And part of that was when they were young, Mindy, my wife, was averse to television. And so we had very limited video time. We were talking to this art guy, and he, when we introduced ourselves as Rachel and John's parents, he was like, oh my gosh, I love Rachel and John. I couldn't believe when they came to class, they both were great drawers, great artists. He met them and got to know them in class. He asked them something along the lines of, how did you come to know your skill as an artist? How did you get to know that you could draw or you could paint? And they said, well, our mom, wouldn't let us watch TV. And literally kind of just created boredom to where it forced us to come up with ways to entertain ourselves. So there was just a space created by the void, the vacuum of no TV, that the human creativity fills because of our drive to be happy, our drive to have fun. If we're not being handed fun, we're going to go make it. And this awakens creativity, imagination at very young ages. And so they were, I hate to use the word forced, but that's what happens when you create a void, a vacuum. And he was just, last night at the art display, he was praising Mindy for being that kind of mother. Oh, I wish more people would do that. And so we were driving home, and she was just kind of feeling a big pat on the back of, hey, I did something right as a parent. And then I made mention of, well, is that one of those things that we gleaned from Christianity? And boy, she lashed out. She said, no. The way Christianity avoids videos is they avoid Disney or Sesame Street and things that where they felt like doctrinally they were going to be corrupted. I think Mindy was very driven by, I want my kids to be smart. Anyway, this is all about cafeteriaism. This is about choosing and pulling out and learning that eventually it's silly to take the detour when you can stay on the track and get to point A and point B, maybe not life and death, but just day to day, in a way that is not wasteful or maybe even derailing. Because what ends up happening when you leave the path, the true path of wisdom and truth and knowledge, ethics, morals, and you try to get those things by way of religion. What I'm seeing, obviously I think anybody with eyes can see, is it ends up producing the opposite. For example, and with just the biggie, love. I've never seen a more deluded group of people that think they're loving. I know how that gets by. I know how that works. For one thing, they're loving to their own. If you're in the subculture, if you're in the cult, if you're in their church, and oftentimes it doesn't even work there, but for the most part, on any given Sunday morning, it's hugs and smiles and look forward to seeing you week to week. This is a community of people that love one another, that cook meals for one another when somebody's sick or, after they've had a baby or a surgery or something. These are people that know how to do community. And so they're feeling the love. Of course, it's exclusionary and it's conditional. And so the rest of the world doesn't experience them as loving. So anyway, I don't know if I'm ever even get to these 40 harmful things. I've got a couple other things. One is curiosity. I just really want to say yes to the human attribute of curiosity. I think if there is a God, it's God-given, right? If we're made in his or her image, curiosity is what pushes us and pulls us to higher and better knowledge and understanding. I've got to know, and I'm not going to put blinders on. I'm going to go into this research scientifically, as honestly as I can, and I'm going to find out what's really true. And I'll give you an example. This is going to sound really weird, but in the context of homosexuality, and one of the things that religious people say is it's unnatural. And you know the term referring to the anus as exit only. Well, here's a group of people that are saying, no, it's a sex organ. And, it's actually meant to function as a sex organ. It is natural. The plumbing works, is what I've heard some gay friends say. I'll be honest. I began to experiment with my own anus to see, well, how is this? And, it's incredible. It's crazy. It is a sex organ. And that was confounding to me because even as a Christian, I was exploring this. And I won't go into the details, but, the whole claim that it's unnatural is not true. But that was driven by my curiosity. And I think in this same context, I want to talk about freedom and feudalism. I think freedom is a virtue that we all admire. And feudalism we obviously see as oppressive. And it's in that context that I'm talking about curiosity, and in the way that we can afford ourselves the freedom to be curious and to read and to seek and to learn and research is when we stop fearing the feudal lord. We owe nothing to the feudal lord. I learned to say I'll never apologize ever again for being human. That's a big deal. It's just as big a deal. That's really there's a couple of phrases that were a big deal to me, and one is join the human race, and two is stop apologizing for being human. I'm not accountable for my sin, if you will. I'm not accountable for being what I am. And if you've ever done any reading and research about free will, we don't have free will. Free will is a myth. We do what we're wired to do. We have to learn to manage that, etc. But I've been convinced that we are what we are. And here's where lip service is given to within Christianity, to God loves you just as you are. I don't know how people can say that and not have a deep, dark conscience about how much of a lie that is. I mean, there's just no way that you can share the gospel out of one side of your mouth and out of the other side of your mouth say, by the way, he loves you just as you are. No, he hates us as we are. It's only when we're hidden in Christ, covered in the blood, sanctified by the Lamb. It's only when this ritual is appropriated over our lives that sin is abolished or hidden. There can't be a bigger contradiction. There's 1,000 contradictions within religion and Christianity, but this is the most blatant, wide out in the open. So, I'm going to get into these 40 harmful effects of Christianity. Number 1, the discouragement of rational critical thought. I don't know about you, but I felt discouraged. I would go to a secular bookstore and I would feel like the whole section on free thinking or even like other religions or New Age, or I remember one time picking up the book Conversations with God, and I was flipping through it, and I had the conscience of one flipping through pornography or something. This is taboo. I shouldn't be reading this. This is written by the devil. The devil is sneaky. He comes as an angel of light, wolf in sheep's clothing. This is a trap. And of course, my critics would say, I told you so, because guess what? The more I read, the more I left Christianity. So they feel confirmed in those forbidden books, because look what it did. You lost your faith. You're going to hell. And it all started with this freedom to think critically and rationally and think for yourself. So yeah, I had one particular friend, a dear friend, one of my best friends. I love him deeply. I respect him deeply. He's a fantastic guy. We had a ton in common. And we really could have been great friends. And he basically wrote me a letter and said, I can't be around you. And I understood what he was saying, in that you are on a path of destruction. And when we're together, because we used to have breakfast every week, we used to have beer every now and then, and I would be sharing, because we're all sharing our journey. And typically when somebody's sharing their journey, people gather around to encourage them. He could not encourage this, and yet he couldn't discourage it either, other than this boycott, other than saying, I'm not going to endorse this by continuing to hang around and listen to you talk about it. I know where this is heading. That's what he said. I know where this is heading. I've seen it happen to other friends before. You're on the path of destruction, and you're going to lose your faith. And I will not be party to it. And so it was his way of loving me, I guess. But it broke my heart. And he is a highly intelligent person, and yet I believe that he's a six-day creationist to this day. And that is a cognitive dissonance that he has to live with, that I could no longer live with, and be honest with myself. Number 2, vilification of homosexuality, resulting in discrimination, parents disowning their children, murder, and suicide. So this is a hatred that is perpetuated by Christianity, and Islam for that matter. Number 3, women treated like second-class citizens based on religious teachings. I think that misogyny and patriarchal dominance is rooted in religion, and it's, or at least it's fueled or encouraged by religion. It probably started out with just, the animal kingdom, as far as the alpha male, or just the whole males rule the roost. I mean, there would be an argument to say, well, see, it's just natural, it's God's way. Well, if there is no God, or at least there's no God that gives a hoot about what's going on in day to day with feelings and emotions, an anthropomorphic God, then we evolve past animalistic instincts. We actually improve on the way we relate to each other socially and culturally with prefrontal cortex, as opposed to lizard brains. I know that as a Christian, there was a part of me that I knew I had to go with, the whole who wears the pants in the house thing. But I never lorded that over Mindy. It was kind of this thing that we had to do because the Bible said to do it. Wives, submit to your husbands. When we really started getting out of Christianity, we released that and said that's stupid. We make mutual decisions. We respect one another equally. Number 4, children growing up to hate and fear science and scientists, because science disproves their parents' religion, leading to appalling scientific illiteracy. And I do think that at least in America, we're scientifically illiterate. And I think it has to do with this Christian suppression of truth. Number 5, tens of thousands tortured and killed as witches, a practice which still continues today. I don't know about that. I mean, obviously it happened and it was stupid. I don't know. Could be wrong. I can't think of an example. Other than Obama, they've been on a witch hunt with him since the day he took oath. Number 6, people aren't making the most of this life because of their belief in an afterlife. I think that's true. I think, we all know how powerful it is to be present in the moment, which part of that means I'm not wishing I was somewhere else, and I'm not deferring anything to the future. I'm here, I'm now, this is it, and this is all that's real. And I'm not going to have a consciousness ever again, just like I didn't exist before my birth, I won't exist after my death. I think that's the most probable belief. It's hard because we love each other and we want to be with each other forever. I think, obviously, the avoidance of death and the denial of death, the denial of finitude and mortality is one of the driving factors for the creation of religion. So I think it's one of the reasons why Christians are bad ecologists. I mean, not only do they not care, there's exceptions. To all of these, there's exceptions. There's people that are Christians and they're recycling. I remember 20 years ago hearing Tony Campolo give a speech about how God told Adam and Eve to, have dominion over the earth. And as stewards of the earth, it was worship. It was an act of worship and a tribute to your God and that commission to be stewards of the earth, to take care of what's been given you. God's obviously not taking care of it. He's delegated that to humanity. And so some people interpret, I think, here again, that's a healthy interpretation of Scripture. But it's one of those detours. I mean, why do you need that? Why can't you just say, hey, this planet has finite resources, and when we do things, like we create plastic water bottles that last for billions of years, that's not sustainable, and it's not thinking about future generations. So I'm just saying common sense would cause us to do a lot of things ethically and smarter, and we don't need Holy Writ or God to tell us that that's true or false or whatever. I mean, we just common sense. Number 7, people dying because they believe their faith makes them immune to snake venom or other lethal aspects of reality. All right, that's kind of self-explanatory. Number 8, people dying and letting their children die because their religion forbids accepting medical help. Number 9, people choked, starved, poisoned, or beaten to death during exorcisms. Pretty marginal, probably, but it happens. Number 10, genital mutilation of babies endorsed by religious texts. I'll never forget Hitchens' comment of how many of us would, be at the birth of our children, hold this little bundle of joy, and say, this is perfect except one thing. Let's get a sharp object and cut off its foreskin. And there's none of us that would occur to us. That would not come to our minds if it weren't for a religious text. I know that there's people who have said, well, it's for hygiene. Well, I personally am uncircumcised, and I've never had an unhygienic problem. I'm on number 11. Psychological and physiological conditions blamed on demons, preventing believers from seeking medical care for themselves and their children. Well, the whole demon world, my God. It's bad enough to concoct a good deity, but the need to create the conflict, the counterpart. It's part of every novel. It's part of all literature. Conflict. And so sure enough, we created the conflicting God. God's archenemy is straight out of a Marvel comic. Number 12, people disowning family members for leaving their religion. I can vouch for that. I wouldn't say disowning, but I have family members that are deeply disappointed in me. Number 13, friendships and romances severed or never started over religious differences. I don't know if they're going to go here, but I would say the opposite is true too. I know a lot of people get married because God told them to, or because Paul told them to, because they said it's better to marry than to burn in lust. And I'm telling you, there's no two human beings that are in love that aren't going to burn in lust. And so as soon as they do, or as soon as they get in that cycle of guilt, we did it, and then we confessed our sin, we repented. And we lasted a few weeks or months, and then we did it again. And so people get married just to bring this, quote, sinful act of sexuality into the light. And so somehow on the other side of this ceremony, the wedding bed, sex is pure and holy and good in God's sight. Before that, it's evil. And so many people have gotten married. That's kind of the opposite of what this point is saying. This one is saying that romances are severed over religious differences, and that's true too, when they might have been fine. And of course, be ye not yoked with an unbeliever. What does light have in common with darkness? So yeah, we're given all kinds of instruction we need to disassociate with people because of these scriptures. Number 14, abstinence-only sex education, resulting in 5 times the amount of sexually transmitted diseases and teenage pregnancies, often leading to ill-fated emergency marriages. And it's not on here, but I think it contributes to abortion. So that's a bad idea. As opposed to just joining the human race, just realize that this is who we are. And you can bring it into wisdom, management, self-control. But This denial of our sexuality is insane. Number 15, women having septic abortions or being forced to have unwanted children they resent because religious organizations have gotten laws passed making abortions illegal or unacceptable. Number 16, censorship, often destructive, of speech, art, books, music, films, poetry, songs, and if possible, thought. Censorship of thought. Yeah. This is especially true of Islam as far as like no movies, no orchestras, whatever, I don't know. I'm only familiar with the West, but we do our share of trying to censor things. Number 17, the demonization of other religions. For example, Christianity demonizing pagans. They're devil worshippers. And I don't know if you saw, there was an article, I think it was on Pathos this week. I was referred to it by Rachel Held Evans. His name's Neil Carter. What I learned about atheists from God's Not Dead. And that's, of course, referring to the movie, Christian movie, about a bitchy college professor who makes all his students denounce God. And it's the worst straw man argument you'll ever see. Anyway, he himself, Neil Carter, is an atheist, and so he's writing tongue-in-cheek that there's 10 things I learned about atheists from watching this movie. Number 1, atheist professors are predatory, and they're out to convert everyone into their ideological clones. Number 2, atheists are selfish, self-absorbed, greedy jerks. Number 3, atheists are cocky, self-sure, and totally enamored with their own superiority. Number 4, atheists will openly threaten you, get in your face, stare you down, even chase you down a hallway and grab you and force you to listen to their angry diatribes because your faith makes them so angry. Number 5, atheists are clearly incapable of love. Atheists lack ethical boundaries. They disbelieve in God because something bad happened to them. Atheists are angry at God. Number 9, atheists are miserable because they believe life is meaningless. Number 10, atheists have no basis for morality. All of these arguments we've had 1,000 times, and it's such an echo chamber because the only people who are going to go see the movie are Christians that already believe it. And the people that aren't going to see the movie are us. And, vice versa. So, here we go around the mulberry tree. This list of 40 harmful effects of Christianity, I'm only on like 17, and I don't have the heart to finish it. I think you get the idea. Listen, thanks for listening. I think I'm going to shut down at this point. We're going to be back next week with a guest, and it's going to be a good show. Bob Pondell and I will be back next week. I hope you join us. Thanks for listening. Good night.